Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Leap of Faith with Penina Taylor.
Hi, and welcome to Leap of Faith, the program where we speak with people about their spiritual journeys so we can gain insight and inspiration on our own spiritual journey. I'm your host, Penina Taylor, and I'm really excited to be here with you today. The first few years I lived in Israel, twice a year I offered a 12-week seminar in Jerusalem exploring the major claims of Christianity and the traditional Jewish understanding of those verses and concepts. I remember during one class, I had a couple of ladies who consistently peppered me with questions, digging into the smallest nuances of what I was teaching. At some point, one of the ladies, after a particularly grueling round of questions, stopped me and said simply, "You actually believed that?" Kind of embarrassed at her honest bewilderment, I very solemnly responded, "Yeah, I did." Because when you don't understand Hebrew, you can't really understand what the Tenach, the Jewish Bible, is actually saying. And it's so easy to create a worldview based on what others tell you it says. Well, fast forward about 10 years. I was in Connecticut teaching at an Aish HaTorah conference, and between classes, I was introduced to an older couple who had stumbled upon the hotel only to see that Aish was having their conference. They were really excited because as Christians who loved and supported Israel and many other Jewish endeavors, they loved Aish HaTorah, and they proudly explained to me that they were learning Hebrew at a local synagogue. Well, knowing more about who they probably were than I was letting on, but also not wanting to get into a long drawn-out conversation, I simply said to them, "Be careful. When you learn biblical Hebrew, you may discover that things don't actually mean what you've always thought they meant." Well, on today's Leap of Faith, I'll be speaking with William Hall. William is a former Evangelical and Messianic pastor and the creator of a website and YouTube channel called Tenach Talk. And he will be sharing how his exploration of the Tenach and its original Hebrew turned his life upside down as he discovered that things didn't actually mean what he had always thought they meant. When we come back from the break, we'll hear William's fascinating story. You're listening to Leap of Faith. I'm Penina Taylor, and we'll be right back.
Always challenging the status quo. Hello, I'm Rod Bryant on Beyond the Matrix here at IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. I want to encourage you to listen each week, every Wednesday at the same time, for an amazing show that will challenge you, inform you, and inspire. News, views, and wisdom for the nations here on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. Don't forget, Beyond the Matrix every week, Wednesday, here on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com.
Be biblical.
Be beautiful.
Wear your crown.
Wrapping is my crown.
Do what married Jewish women have been doing for thousands of years. Celebrate the art of head wrapping. I'm Andrea Grinberg from Rapunzel.com. We have beautiful scarves, stunning accessories, scarves for faith, scarves for healing, and scarves for fun. Rapunzel.com. That's Rapunzel with a W. Or click on our banner on the Israel News Talk Radio homepage.
Rapunzel.com. Beautiful scarves, stunning accessories paired with tutorials, support, and a vibrant community to give you everything you need to start and perfect your head covering journey.
Don't forget, join the Rapunzel community group on Facebook to see, learn, and share your beautiful wraps. That's Rapunzel with a W on Facebook.
I love Rapunzel.
I love Rapunzel.
I love Rapunzel.
Get 10% off your purchase with promo code RADIO. Go now to Rapunzel.com. Leap of Faith with Penina Taylor.
Hi, and welcome back to Leap of Faith. I'm Penina Taylor, and I'm really excited to be here with you today. Joining me is my guest, William Hall. Now, you may be familiar with William's name because he co-hosts a show here on Israel News Talk Radio. And William is a former pastor who's now known as a leader in the Noahide movement. He spends a considerable amount of time running his video channel called Tenach Talk, which hosts, I believe it's 10 shows per week. He'll correct me if I'm wrong, covering different topics relating to Torah and its perspective on faith. And he recently actually added another show that is specifically dedicated to women. So today, William is going to be sharing with us his journey from Christianity to Torah. William, thank you, and welcome to Leap of Faith.
Thank you for the invite. I really appreciate this. And I want to say thank you also for coming on to Tenach Talk.
I did that a long time ago, didn't I?
Yeah. We'll have to do that again soon.
Definitely. I always enjoy talking with you. So, William, I usually like to start our conversations off at the very beginning. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how you grew up?
All right. Well, I was raised actually in a secular household for the most part, secular, to be specific, secular Christian household, if you will. I was adopted when I was around 5 years old, and my mother took me and my younger sister, because we were the two youngest of the four, and my biological father, who later became Messianic rabbi, took the two older boys, and they parted ways. And we went for years without any contact whatsoever. I never talked to them, never saw them, didn't see the brothers.
Oh, wow.
When I was about 9 years old, I actually remember being in a Baptist church that my mother went to at the time in Durant, Oklahoma, Calvary Baptist Church. And I remember just being emotional. You know, for me, for years, that was my first God experience, theoretically. And so I went in there. I just knew I had to go up to the altar. I just had to go. I don't even remember what it was about. I just remember having to go up there. I told my mom, I've got to go. I had no idea why. I mean, I kind of assumed why, but so that was the very first experience that I thought God was right there and I could touch him almost in a way. So, and then for years after that, there was hardly no interaction with the church or God at all. It went from that moment to, it was almost like somebody had a baby and then just went and dropped them off the curb. That was kind of what it felt like. And so my mother was a very loving mother, but had a very abusive stepfather. And so years passed. When I was around 16, ran away from home, went to go find my dad, my biological father, because I knew he was, at least he was a godly person. You know, he wasn't a secular. I used to joke, call my stepdad an uncircumcised Philistine because he was so much like that. Very abusive mentally and physically, emotionally. And so leaving that was really, really one of the best things I did at the time. So anyway, I eventually moved in with my dad, my real dad. And it was a shell shock because it went from no church to all of a sudden being in church like 4 or 5 nights a week. And I was welcoming it at first because I just needed to change. And then after a while, I began to just repel that as well. Wound up leaving home, and I got married at a young age. I think around 95-ish, I finally started getting back involved with the church. Now, at this point, I'd already been in a lot. I'd already learned a lot, and so on and so forth. But it was when I was around 25 is when I started getting more serious about God and started studying and started trying to get my life on the God path, whatever that meant.
Was your wife along with you on that?
No, not at this time. I'd been married and all of a sudden I had gotten divorced as well. So I was only we were married for about 3 years total on the first marriage. And I've been married 3 times, unfortunately. This is the third time was a charm. Going on 21 years right now together, 20 years married.
Congratulations. Mazel tov. That's wonderful.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So during that time, I had spent a lot of time dedicated to studies. Well, for the longest time, my dad, who started off as an evangelical Christian, eventually started studying Hebrew, and that's when he became what he called himself, a rabbi, for about, to date, if he was still with us, it'd be around 28 years right now.
Now, was he Jewish?
No. He interestingly enough, I'm going to throw an insert in there. You asked this question. Sure. There's so much dishonesty in the Messianic movement, and unfortunately, my dad had done the same thing on the bio on his webpage for his congregation that was there. He told a story about him being raised up as a Jewish boy and how he was rejected in school, and it was completely fabricated. There was no truth to that at all.
Wow.
And it's in the same breath. he had a little yeshiva program, and he was a good teacher. I mean, he taught some really interesting things, and a lot of good stuff too. A lot of really good stuff about Judaism he taught, but it was always interlaced with the Christian Messiah or the New Testament Messiah figure. And even there, when he would push for donations, he would tell everybody that he's from the Levite. He's Levite. Him and my stepmom as well, and neither one of those were true either. And so, in general, my dad was a really nice, loving guy and trustworthy. But when it come to spiritual things, it was like Paul taught, to become all things to all men, so that at least some
Right. I
might
was
be
just
saved.
going to say, a lot of people justify deception by that verse, which if any of our listeners are not familiar with it, there is a passage in the New Testament where Paul basically says that he has become all things to all men. And a lot of people use that passage as justification for lying and deceiving people as to who they actually are.
Right. That's so true. So true. And I even practiced that myself as a Christian for the purpose of saving souls.
Right. It's justified.
And it was very much, it wasn't even considered something wrong to do.
Right.
So kind of projecting, I guess, forward now on that path. So from being born to a Christian Baptist preacher, then divorced, separated, 16 years, reconnected again, did some Bible studies before 25, but around when I was 25 when I really got serious and began to take it really, really serious and just started studying. And after a few years, I started realizing that I started seeing some inconsistencies, but we swept it under the rug because I was a teacher and just taught them the things that I knew and avoided the things that I didn't, and kind of moved on until I began to I started studying Hebrew, not because of the inconsistency. It was just because I was curious, to be honest with you. But it was after I started studying the Hebrew, then I started seeing some contradictions from what the Christian New Testament said about the Hebrew scriptures. And I think at that point is when I really was like, I've got to figure this out. And so I basically prayed and I was like, God, you got to give me this just insatiable hunger to just read your word. And the only thing that came to my mind was stop with the New Testament and start back with the quote unquote Old Testament, start in the beginning. Right. And so I spent about a year with the New Testament completely closed, bought an audio Bible. Is the best decision I ever made, and just started with Genesis. And I went through from Genesis all the way up to Malachi, all the way to Malachi, just over and over again. And then finally I got up in English, yes. Okay. And just King James Version. Mm-hmm. And so I studied that whole thing for like a year, just that alone. But I went back and forth from, like I went through Leviticus one time and like 4 times, like in a 2-day period, just over and over again. And then I did that with all the books of the Torah. And then after about a year, I was like, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and start reading the New Testament again. And boy, oh my gosh, just using the King James Version of studying the Hebrew scriptures and just the English King James, and then going back and reading that same version of their Christian New Testament. Right. I was sick of my stomach. I mean, finding out that some of them were intentional, some of them were done ignorantly, but either way, it's wrong no matter how you slice it.
Yeah, so you were starting to see these real contradictions and inconsistencies between the Tenach and the New Testament.
Yes. And by this time, I had already been teaching I was associate youth pastor for quite a few years, I want to say about 5 or 6 years. I say quite a few. That's a lot to me. Yeah, sure. I'm still 50 years young. So, and then later just continued teaching, and then eventually opened up a little home group where we had people coming here, where I would lead them and teach them about how, as I began to look more Messianic, looking at the Jewish side of the Christian Bible, I began to start having Passover Seders and things like that here at our home. And we had a home group. And there, of course, there's a lot missing from the story, but just over a long period of time, this leads up to about 7 years ago where everything changed.
Wow. And I think it's probably good to point out to our listeners that when Christians start incorporating Jewish things, it's not always purposely to be deceptive, that many times it's in an effort to make their own faith more what they consider authentic, right? Which I'm assuming is what you were doing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. They start saying, hey, our Savior did these things and lived as a Jew, and so maybe we should be doing that too.
Right. And the Messianic view, even Christian churches some of them are opening up their pulpits to Jewish sides of things, discussing finding out that, Christmas and Easter are pagan, they're going to start reaching out to the more Jewish holidays and stuff. And I think that's great because they're breaking away from that shell of tradition they've been stuck in for 2,000 years. And so now where that leads, who knows? It's not up for me or anybody else to judge that. But I know for me, moving to the Messianic movement was a huge stepping stone. And if I had not been, if I'd been a little more passive, I might still be stuck there. But I really, really wanted to know these answers, and I was open-minded about it. Unfortunately, so many people aren't.
And a lot of people do get stuck there.
Yes, absolutely. Even my dad. I mean, once my dad, like I said, he was a Messianic Christian. I can't say Messianic rabbi anymore because it's, to me, it conflicts, but I say Messianic Christian leader. And he probably for at least 10 years or so before he passed, which he just passed this past year around late December. Thank you. He began to be exposed, at least directly exposed to the errors of what he was teaching.
Wow.
And so I have a friend of mine, Lon Cherry Holmes. He'll be on the show soon, by the way, teaching Hebrew grammar. Anyway, he was actually born in the Messianic movement. He was born and raised in my dad's synagogue. Yes.
William, I'm so sorry. I do have to stop you because we are out of time for this segment. I can't wait to revisit this on the second segment. But right now I do have to stop you. We have to take a short break. When we come back, we'll continue our fascinating conversation with my very special guest, William Hall. You're listening to Leap of Faith. I'm Penina Taylor, and we'll be right back.
Shalom, everybody. Making a difference often takes just one moment and one person at a time. I am Orly Benny Davis, your show host on Israel News Talk Radios from Jerusalem with Love. You'll be hearing people talking about politics, religion, social issues, and making a better tomorrow. Join me, Orly Benny Davis, for God and Country. From Jerusalem with Love.
Wednesdays on Israel News Talk Radio.
Leap of Faith with Penina Taylor.
Hi, and welcome back to the second segment of Leap of Faith. I'm your host, Penina Taylor, and today I'm speaking with William Hall, former evangelical pastor and founder and director of Tenak Talk. William has been sharing with us his inspirational journey to Torah, and before the break, he was telling us about his father and how he had become a Messianic leader. And William, you were telling us a story about a friend who was born into the Messianic movement, right?
Yes, correct.
Okay, why don't you continue there?
Okay, very good. So I've interviewed a lot of people myself, and his story is unique in that he was actually born into the Messianic movement. A lot of people get there from Christianity, and every once in a blue moon, you might find one that backtracks from Judaism or from secular Judaism and reaches out to Jews for Jesus or whatever. But this kid was born in it, and he's a youngster. I mean, he's 20 years younger than me, but he's still an adult and very smart. So he was born into it, and he stayed with my dad his entire youth. Even had a Messianic bar mitzvah. He eventually moved out of their synagogue. He moved to Israel, basically.
Okay, as a Messianic.
As a Messianic, he moved to Israel. He was going to go to school for electrical engineering, and he was going to do this at Tel Aviv University. And he found out very quickly that they didn't teach that class in English. So this kid, man, I wished I had half of his brain. He's so smart and so absorbing. Golly. So he spent the next 3 months binge learning Hebrew.
Mm-hmm.
And in less than 6 months, he studied it so much that he became very, very proficient enough to actually understand and work and go to school and start learning.
Wow.
And within about a year, he was pretty much fluent in Hebrew. And since then, he's been fascinated with it. He's been studying it more and more, and he teaches Hebrew. He's actually in Dallas now as a school teacher, and he's actually going to be teaching the Hebrew language, which is really cool.
Wow.
So yeah, So born into my dad's synagogue. The point of me bringing this up earlier was that for the past 10 years, my dad has at least been exposed to problems because whenever Lon moved to Israel, he was only there for about a year and a half when he left the Christian movement too. He shut the door on the New Testament. Now, he was like a son to my dad because he was born there and was entire youth and bar mitzvah and everything. He was very close to my dad. And my dad completely shut him down spiritually. He would still visit and have coffee, things, but they would never talk about the Bible. He didn't want to talk about it at all. And my dad did the same thing with me. Every time we got into a discussion, he's like, "Oh, I don't want to talk about it." I'm like, "Okay, this guy is a seasoned veteran in Hebrew." My dad was pretty much fluent in biblical Hebrew. I mean, he didn't need, the cheats or vowels to read any part of Torah or understand or to know what he learned those words to be. And so for him to not want to discuss biblical things with someone who has rejected that Messiah for himself should have been a major red flag. And I think it was. I'm pretty sure the latter part of his, especially the last few years of his life as a spiritual person, was very troubled because of Lon and because of me also leaving, knowing what I know.
When you think about how much they have at stake, when somebody is a leader, to even open themselves up to the idea that what they believe might not be correct. It's not just on a personal level of, oh my God, I've believed this for so long and it might not be wrong. I mean, I remember the upheaval of that, but they also have before them that they might totally lose their entire identity as to who they are as a leader, and to basically go from being somebody who is looked up to as somebody who knows everything to somebody who knows absolutely nothing. That's a really scary proposition.
Right. And furthermore, that point to be even pushed harder when you have somebody like my father, for example, who was, approaching 70, 72 years old. And that's all he's ever known. He's never had, ever since he started teaching, he's not really had a job that paid any income. He lived off of what was coming in from the donations from people. Right. And finally say, "Hey guys, I was wrong. Sorry, we got to close down." That means you instantly lose every resource financially that you've ever had. Right. You have no residual income coming in. And so that had been horrifying. And for him to be suffering with, for me to be suffering with that I couldn't even imagine. I'm thankful I actually had a job and I didn't have to go through that, but that would have to be something I couldn't even imagine how I would have handled that, to be honest with you. Right. That would have been really tough.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So back to the story then. You had this friend who went off to Israel. What was going on with you at the time?
Okay, so there was a big gap of time between whenever I talked to him last until I talked to him again once I moved back here and started becoming a Messianic, because my dad and I stopped talking for a long time because of, different spiritual belief differences and all this other stuff. And at some point in time, I had moved off to Tennessee. Been there for about 10 years. That's where I met my wife. So while I was still working in the church, I had ran into some issues with the pastor, and he did some stuff that was, to me, really just, I couldn't believe this guy is actually still preaching after, what we went through. And it was something emotional, and it was kind of a verbally abusive sort of thing. And he would still go up and wear a smile every Sunday. And I just got so irritated. I just said, you know what, I'm taking a break from this whole God thing. So I moved off to Tennessee because I've always liked to sing. And some people told me many times before, man, you need to go to Nashville. Well, that stayed in my head. And so after this whole thing happened with this church, I finally said, I'm just going to unplug. And so I moved to Nashville. And I got jobs singing at 2 or 3 different places in downtown Nashville, just singing, just being a vocal. I couldn't play guitar, but I could sing really well, country music and stuff. And so I did that for a while. I was there for about 2 or 3 months. Whenever I met my wife, she'd come down, get this, on Ishtar Easter Sunday. Yeah. So the guy I was working for, thankfully, he was so either greedy or in need of money that he said, nope, we're not closing the bar down on Easter Sunday. There might be 1 or 2 people come in and that'll be worth it. And I was like, that's so stupid. But had he not done that, me and my wife may have never met.
Wow. Yeah, that's what we call providence. Yep.
So here I am. Me and the door guy are taking a walk down the street. Streets are empty. It's like 8:00 at night and it's dark outside. The street lights were nice and it was really pretty outside, but we're walking, just trying to find somebody who we could drag into our club. And as we're coming back, we couldn't find anybody. As we're coming back, we came in to met Chris, my wife, Christine, and her friend. and her friend's teenage daughter, and then that girl's best friend. So it was like 4 of them. My wife was alone other than her best friend there. So we talked him into coming down and checking out the club. And long story short, it was really a neat thing because I think I was attracted to her. Number one, she was very beautiful, but also because she wasn't flirty type. She was just really almost stuck up.
Okay.
Okay, so the reason why I find that funny, why I think I was attracted to that, because if you're at a restaurant, or if you're in Walmart, or if you're walking down the street in the daytime, or if you're at a park and you meet a stuck-up woman, you're like, golly, you turn your nose the other way, right? But in a club, to find someone who's stuck up, that means something completely different. That means she's not happy with the bar scene. That means something else is going on with her.
She's not trying too hard.
She was trying to stay out of the way. She was only there because her friend Mickey agreed to come, and we talked her into coming. That's the only reason she came there. So the whole time we were there, I finally I did my little singing skit, and the whole time Mickey's up and the girls are up, and there's a few people in the club at this point, and Chris is just sitting there by herself at the table, kind of just not with the snooty face, just kind of sitting there like she's happy and content, but not up moving around, not talking to anybody. And so anyway, they were going to be back the next night, because they were there for the week, and that was Sunday. They were going to leave back on Tuesday, I think. So they came in Monday night. Again, we talked them into coming back Monday, and then they left out Tuesday morning to go back to Chicago, and we're in Nashville. Whenever she got home to me leaving a voice message on her answering machine, singing a Mark Wills song, and that was it.
She married you for your voice, huh?
It sure wasn't my looks or my money.
Oh my!
Oh my gosh! Anyway, so that's a sweet spot.
So
a lot of sweet spots.
Guys, where was she spiritually?
Oh, this is interesting. Good question. Okay, so she was, and even at this point, was a very highly dedicated Catholic. She had been raised in the Catholic school ever since kindergarten. She'd been in Catholic school, high school, after high school. She never missed a mass. I mean, for years. Wow. I mean, and then we met then around 2000. But I was actually at this point in time, I was still very much Christian, but I had been out of the church. And so they kept coming to visit. And eventually I talked her into moving down. And so she did. And that was a big game changer. But after she moved down, of course, she had her own daughter at this point. She was like 7 years old. And I knew that I couldn't keep doing the nightlife because I've got a family now. So I quit the nightlife and I got into construction, and we started going back to church. But she didn't know anything but Catholic church. Right. And so, make long story short, we moved forward, and I talked her into going to a place called World Outreach Church in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, which was at the time it was a small mega church. I mean, technically anything over 10,000 members, they call it a mega church, but right now they're actually close to 100,000. But we went there and started teaching. I got back involved in teaching again there, and actually I kind of went back in differently. This time I was wanting to teach the kids because I wasn't really prepared to get in full stream, and so I was like, well, this would be a nice soft landing for me to go in and start teaching the kids, and I started doing that, and was there for about maybe 8 years or so. We were there. And then it was at that point, whenever I started running into my final problems with the New Testament. And so I called with the Christian view of it. And that's when I called my dad. He kept telling me, man, son, you need to learn Hebrew. And I'm like, nah, I'm not interested. I didn't want to be a Messianic. I was happy being a Christian. And I eventually did. I eventually said, you know what? But it wasn't because of him telling me. It was because I ran into a problem theologically with something with the story of King David.
Hey, wow.
The loss of his son.
I would actually like to hear more about that, but right now I have to stop you again because we're out of time. We have to take another short break, but when we come back, we'll continue our fascinating conversation with my very special guest, William Hall. You're listening to Leap of Faith. I'm Penina Taylor, and we'll be right back.
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
This is Shai Bentako, and each week I'll be webcasting to you from Judea, origin of the word Jew, a people besieged and beleaguered in every generation. Nazi Germany's but a memory, but in its place the world invented the phantom Palestinians as this generation's internationally authorized Jew killers. Tune in for a different slant on life in Israel, Phantom Nation, every Monday.
Hi, I'm Rabbi David Aaron. The soul basics are the most profound, the most essential, and yet often the most neglected in our education. Join me for Soul Talk on Israel's News Talk Radio and discover the secrets to love, spiritual growth, and personal power.
Leap of Faith with Penina Taylor.
Hi, and welcome back to the last segment of today's Leap of Faith. I'm your host, Penina Taylor, and today I am speaking with William Hall, former evangelical pastor, founder, and director of Tenach Talk, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. Well, William's been sharing with us his inspirational journey to Torah, and before the break, he was just about to tell us about how he had started to run into some real problems with his faith. So, William, why don't you take it from there?
All right. Thank you. Yeah. So basically, after being at the church for, 8 or 9 years, however long it was, and I'm just more studies, I ran into the story with King David again and how he lost his son. I won't give you those details because I don't think it's really imperative to this point, but that's what triggered my desire to learn more about the Hebrew Bible. So the first thing I wanted to do, of course, was to learn Hebrew. And I knew my dad I knew he knew how to read it. Even with Messianic lenses on, he still knew how to read. He knew the alphabet. He knew how to pronounce the words, and he knew how to direct me to where the words, I could get a translation of it. And that's all I wanted. So that's where it began. So I started there. And shortly after I asked him that question, we ended up moving back from Tennessee back to Texas, which is where he was at the whole time. At the time, I didn't really want to go to Messianic. I just wanted to start looking into Hebrew. Well, when I got here, my brother asked me if I want to go to their church, and they went to this big Christian church. It was also a really large church, and the pastor was really charismatic, really nice guy. And I was like, yeah, sure. And then right after we started going there, I was like, you know what? I mean, literally like about 3 or 4 weeks in, that's when I started going back into the Hebrew Bible again. And I was thinking, even the name Shabbat, the word Shabbat itself, that's like almost like saying day 7, Shiva, and I'm thinking, how can we possibly be going to church on day 1 when it said, remember the 7th day?
Right.
And then I found out all the days are named, they're numbered, they're not named. I'm thinking, oh my God, this is like mind blowing to me. I'm like, holy cow, we've been doing this wrong, and it's right before our eyes. So I was like, that's it. From now on, we're going. They at the time they actually had a Saturday night service. So I said, that's it. We're switching. We're going to start going to Saturday night services. And I didn't understand the sunset thing yet, but that's okay.
Right.
It was a step in the right direction.
Right. Yeah.
And so literally that week, before Saturday, it was one day during the week, could have been Wednesday or Thursday, sent a mass email saying that they're no longer hosting Saturday night services.
Oh.
I was like, are you kidding me? Yeah. I was like, this is a joke, right? Thought it was in a weird dream or something. So I was like, well, now I have no choice. If we're going to do Saturdays, I have to go to my dad's, Right. And so that's when we started going to my dad's. And that when I went on there for about 3.5 years, I helped him with video production there. And I actually taught the youth there. They didn't have a youth leader, so I became his youth leader and began to, give messages every week, like normal role. And finally, we ran into some issues with some personality clashes with him and me. And so I basically told him I was going to step down. And what I realized after that was after I stopped teaching and after I stopped doing video where I was actually able to just listen to him teach, I started seeing a whole lot of other issues. Around that same time, my friend Lon came back into view. Actually, he came back into view actually earlier, but by this time he wasn't living here anymore. When I went to my dad's, that's what made me think about Lon. So this is like, remember my time at my dad's was like 3.5 years. And so when I first went back, I was like, oh, where's Lon? I wonder how he's done. So I called him up and he was very hush-hush, but very glad to talk. So we talked friendly really, really quickly, but spiritually he was kind of resistant. I was like, oh man. And then I talked about a spiritual thing and he just planted this little seed. Like, are you sure? Is that really what that Hebrew says? And that's all he would say. I said, I'm pretty sure. And I was like, anyway, so then we started talking about something else. About a month later, we get on the phone again and he keeps dropping these seeds all the time. And then finally I stopped talking to him because I realized that what he was doing was he was basically letting me know he didn't believe in the New Testament Messiah anymore. And I was like, whoa, how could you possibly do that? And I was like completely blown away by that. The last phone call we had was around the time whenever me and my dad were having problems. That's whenever he mentioned some psycho name I've never heard of before. Tovia Singer, have you heard of this guy? Yeah. So anyway, when he told me, he said, "Man, you really need to listen to this Tobias Singer guy." And I'm like, "Why? What does he do?" He goes, "Well, he kind of teaches why the Jewish people don't believe in the New Testament figure." And I was like, okay. I was like, "Hey, man, I got to go." And I wasn't ready for that. Well, I'm thinking maybe 2, 3 months, 6 months might have passed, but time passed. And then I started finding more stuff because by this time I'd already started learning Hebrew and I'm 3 years into it. And I started seeing these problems. I'm thinking, wait a minute, maybe there's something to it anyway. So I reached out to listening to Rabbi Tobias Singer, and I was like, oh my God, I listened to like one audio file on outreachjudaism.org. He's got the free audio tab at the top. That's a plug for him, by the way. If you haven't been there, it's really awesome. So I listened to one of them and I was like, I kind of freaked out. I listened to it and I almost got finished. And I was like, no, I can't listen to this. And I had to turn it off. And so I just totally unplugged from that. I was like, I do not want to hear that. I've got things to do. I'm a Messianic teacher now. I've got to learn how Jesus, Yeshua fits into Passover and how he fits in all these feasts and all this other stuff. So I stopped and I turned it away. And it was around 3 years total, because after I left my dad's, we actually were Messianic. I was a Messianic teacher in my home for about 1.5 years. And so during those last couple of years, I would do this Passover thing. Every year Passover would come up, even though I had this seed in the back of my head that Jesus was not the Messiah, Yeshua was not the Messiah, regardless of how you wrap him and what name you call him. Every time I get to Passover, I was like, I've got to find it. He's got to fit in here somewhere. And so I found the problems, and I was like, I'm going to call a couple of my Messianic teacher buddies, pretty well-known ones at the time. And they told me the same thing I already knew. They didn't answer anything for me. So I just ignored it the first year. I said, yeah, I'll just do the same old, and I'll just revisit it again next year. Well, a year passes, Passover comes again. And here you go. I'm sitting here thinking, okay, I got to find this out now. So I reached out to a couple different people. I did some more research, and I'm starting to find more and more problems rather than resolutions. And finally, on the third year, I finally got to the point where I was like, that's it. It was also right at that time, on that third year, right at the Passover time, my wife turns me on to another book. And it's a book called Leaving Jesus by James Wood Jr. Amazing. I mean, short little stick of dynamite. And he quoted Rabbi Singer in there a lot. But that book was the one that I needed to read. And the irony was, my wife was very much a Christian. She already suspected me leaving Jesus because we were Messianic leaders at home for that last 1.5 years, 2 years, whatever. And she noticed that last whatever months it was. But she noticed that I started removing the name of Yeshua out of all the prayers. And everybody else noticed too, obviously. And so that was crazy. Those times were weird. And so as we moved forward and I started taking those out, my wife, she was very suspicious. And she said, we talked a few times. I said, well, I had a few doubts about certain things. She goes, you're not doubting Jesus, are you? And I'm like, maybe. I said, I'm just trying to resolve some issues here. I said, I really need to study this particular way. And, I'm not going to tell you can believe whatever you want to. I'm not going to try to tell you to stop being Christian or, whatever it is that you would like to remain. Because I know people who are married who don't have the same faith and they're happily married. So we can do the same thing here if we have to. And so she was okay with that. Next thing you know, sometime a week or so later, she buys this book on Amazon. She had it on Amazon Kindle, and it was called Leaving Jesus, right? And then she says, it was really funny. She said, I've got this book I bought. She goes, but it's called Leaving Jesus. She goes, do me a favor, read it. But if it has anything to do at all with the title, she goes, I don't want to know about it. I was like, okay. So here I go. And the book's not big, and it's an audio file. I kind of binged it because it was so interesting and so resolving. I had to finish it like in the same day. I mean, I literally, I skipped out on a few hours of work to finish this book. And I got home and she said, so did you get a chance to listen to any part of the book? And I said, yeah, I actually listened to the entire thing. She goes, really? And I said, yeah. She goes, so what was it about? I was like, hey, so what's for dinner? She said she didn't want to know. And I didn't tell her. And she just looked at me. Her eyes got real big and ghostly. And she was like, okay, let's go find something for dinner. And then after I finished that book, now she's curious and she wants to know. So now she's reading this stuff. I'll have you know, she resolved herself away from Jesus at that point quicker than I did.
Wow.
She's a study. She was open-minded and she began to study it herself more and more. And we kind of came to the conclusion together, but she kind of beat me there. She just didn't tell me. She beat me there probably by a month or so. And we eventually tried to shut the doors on our little home synagogue, as we called it. And some of the people who were here at the time, we had actually become friends with. They become our friends. And they knew our choices. And they decided they didn't want us to shut. They wanted to start learning Hebrew. So I started teaching the Hebrew that I knew. I'm not fluent, but I can very well navigate my way through the Torah parshas easily.
Wow. So, William, we are actually out of time for this segment, but I want you, in the last minute or so that we have here, tell us about what you're doing now. Tell us about what Tenach Talk is and how people can reach you.
Okay, so basically, Tenach Talk for me was inspired by Chabad.org because they have it's a great website with tons and tons of audio resources, video resources. And in my mind, as I started going along, I was like, man, I would love to have something like that. And then eventually I went to go see Rabbi Singer at a debate, not a lecture, in Houston. We met, but anyway, long story short, because we did a Skype interview with him. He was supposed to come to our house for a big meeting, but his flight got canceled and he had to go straight to Houston. We missed it. But that night we actually had a Skype call and had all the people here, was able to ask him questions on the Skype call. And he had never really done that before. And so when we got to Houston, we're walking out to the car and he goes, William, can you do that again? Can you set up another Skype call, maybe regularly? I'm like, oh yeah, easily. Of course, at the time I had no idea what I was talking about. I just knew that I was going to do it regardless. I said, yeah, absolutely. So that's kind of where it got triggered. And Tenach Talk was born. My friend, just like overnight, had picked out the name. It's spelt wrong. I know it's spelt wrong. I mean, some people take issue with that. But that's the only website available. The Tanakh was not available as a website, so I had to do something. And so we changed the spelling a little bit, and that's how it was tenachtalk.com. And then the phone number, the 85595 Bible, all this stuff. My friend Travis Wirtz actually just set everything up it seemed like overnight. And I was like, holy cow, this is amazing. And next thing you know, episode 1.
Okay, so you have a website, you have a YouTube channel, and if somebody really identified with something that you said today and would like to get in touch with you, how can they get in touch with you?
They can send me an email to William, William, at tenachtalk.com, tenaktalk.com. Or if it's easier, you can just do tenachtalk@gmail. Okay. Either one of those will work.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Boy, we could do a whole nother show just filling in all of the stuff that you didn't get a chance to talk about. So I'm sorry that we're out of time, but I want to really just say thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for the invitation. It's been a pleasure. I always enjoy visiting with you.
Okay, well, you've been listening to Leap of Faith. I'm Penina Taylor, and I'd love to hear from you as well. If you'd like to be in touch with me, you can email me at penina@israelnewstalkradio.com. That's PENINA@israelnewstalkradio.com. Thanks again for being here with me today, and I'll see you next time when we take a leap of faith together here on Israel News Talk Radio.
Israel News Talk Radio's chat room. Just click the orange button at the top of the IsraelNewsTalkRadio.home page, log in as yourself or an anonymous guest, and join in on the fun. You'll meet other listeners from all over the world who listen to Israel News Talk Radio, and you can make new friends. Israel News Talk Radio's chat room. It's the closest you can get to being in the studio with us.
We love listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Where can you get the inside news on Israel? At Israel News Talk Radio, we're dedicated to sharing Israel's inside story with the world by providing our listeners with news on Israeli politics, current affairs, and Israeli Jewish culture. The Israel News Talk Radio homepage also provides you, the listener, with useful information at your fingertips, with scrolling news headlines, weather, currency exchange, Shabbat candlelighting times, and so much more. Our radio programming is always accessible and on demand. We operate absolutely free of charge for everyone, everywhere. If you love what we do, partner with us now by becoming an Israel News Talk Radio supporter. With your support, you'll be inscribed on our Israel News Talk Radio Wall of Fame. There's nothing like us in the world. Be part of something great. Israel News Talk Radio. Straight talk from Israel.
If you love Israel News Talk Radio, then you'll love our Facebook page. We keep you up to date on what's happening in Israel, plus little surprise treasures that we don't share on the radio. Go now to follow us on Facebook. Just look for the Israel News Talk Radio Facebook page, and don't forget to subscribe and follow us by clicking on the like button. We post great stuff there that you'll want to share. Israel News Talk Radio on Facebook and Israel News Radio on Twitter.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.